The old Victorian mansion at the end of Elm Street had been abandoned for decades, its Gothic spires piercing the perpetually overcast sky like accusing fingers. Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned paranormal investigator, stood before its wrought iron gates, her breath forming ghostly wisps in the October air. The locals whispered tales of the Blackwood family who once lived there, how they had vanished without a trace one winter night in 1924, leaving behind only bloodstains on the walls, and an inexplicable sense of dread that seemed to seep from the very foundations. Sarah pushed open the creaking gate, its hinges protesting with a sound like dying birds. She had been called here by Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, the last surviving member of the town council, who claimed that strange lights had been seen flickering in the mansion's windows after midnight. More disturbing still were the reports of children's laughter echoing from within, despite the house having been sealed for nearly a century. The front door stood ajar, as if inviting her inside. Sarah's equipment bag felt heavier with each step, weighted down with electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, and voice recorders. She had investigated hundreds of supposedly haunted locations, debunking most as elaborate hoaxes or misunderstood natural phenomena. But something about this place felt different, ancient and malevolent in ways that made her skin crawl. As she crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped noticeably. Her breath now came in visible puffs, and the floorboards groaned beneath her feet with sounds that seemed almost musical, like a funeral dirge played on a broken piano. The wallpaper hung in tattered strips, revealing patches of wall beneath that were stained with what looked disturbingly like handprints, too small to belong to adults. The mansion's interior was a maze of shadow and decay. Dust motes danced in the pale shafts of light that managed to penetrate the boarded windows, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that belied the house's sinister reputation. Sarah set up her base camp in what had once been the grand foyer, arranging her instruments with practiced efficiency while trying to ignore the persistent feeling that she was being watched. Her EMF detector began registering unusual readings almost immediately, the needle fluctuating wildly as she moved through the ground floor rooms. In the library, leather-bound books lay scattered across the floor, their pages yellowed and brittle with age. Some appeared to have been torn apart with inhuman savagery, while others bore strange symbols that hurt to look at directly, as if they were somehow wrong on a fundamental level. The dining room still contained the remnants of what must have been the Blackwood family's final meal. China plates sat on the mahogany table, covered in a thick layer of dust, but still bearing the ghostly outlines of food that had long since rotted away. The chairs were arranged as if the family had simply stepped away for a moment, intending to return. But it was the high chair at the head of the table that made Sarah's blood run cold. Tiny scratches covered its wooden surface, forming patterns that looked almost like words in a language she couldn't identify. As evening approached, Sarah began to hear the sounds that had drawn her here. First came the whispers, so faint they might have been mistaken for wind through broken windows. But there was no wind that night, and the whispers seemed to come from the walls themselves, forming words in what sounded like multiple languages overlapping and intertwining in impossible harmonies. The children's laughter started just after 9 o'clock. It echoed through the halls like silver bells, but there was something fundamentally wrong with the sound. It was too pure, too perfect, like the laughter of children who had never known sorrow or pain. Sarah followed the sound up the grand staircase, her flashlight beam dancing across portraits of the Blackwood family that seemed to watch her progress with knowing eyes. The laughter led her to a nursery on the second floor, where a rocking horse still moved back and forth in gentle arcs despite the complete absence of any breeze. The walls were covered with murals of fairy tale scenes, but the paint had faded and warped over the decades, transforming innocent images into nightmarish tableaux. Little Red Riding Hood's face had melted into a skull-like grimace, while the 3 little pigs cowered before a wolf whose eyes glowed with an inner fire. Sarah's temperature reading showed the nursery was nearly 20 degrees colder than the rest of the house. Her cameras captured strange orbs of light that moved with purposeful intelligence, while her voice recorders picked up whispers in what sounded like the voices of children, speaking words that seemed to bypass her ears and resonate directly in her bones. It was in the nursery that Sarah first saw them clearly. 3 children, their forms translucent, but unmistakably present, playing in the corner with toys that existed only in their ghostly realm. They appeared to be siblings, ranging in age from perhaps 5 to 10 years old, their period clothing marking them as residents of the 1920s. Their skin was pale as moonlight, and their eyes held an ancient sadness that seemed far too profound for such young faces. The oldest child, a girl with long dark hair tied in ribbons, looked up at Sarah with eyes that held depths of knowledge no living child should possess. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of sorrow and rage, a sound that made Sarah's heart race with primal terror. "You shouldn't have come here," the child whispered, her words echoing with unnatural resonance. "This place hungers, and it has been so very long since it last fed." The other children continued their play, but Sarah noticed with growing horror that their games involved reenacting scenes of violence and death. They moved toy figures through elaborate scenarios of murder and mayhem, their laughter taking on increasingly sinister tones as the night wore on. The youngest child, a boy who couldn't have been more than 5 when he died, looked up at Sarah with eyes that had seen too much. "Mama and Papa tried to leave," he said in a voice like winter wind through bare branches. "But the house wouldn't let them. The house never lets anyone leave." Sarah tried to back away from the nursery, but found that her feet seemed rooted to the floor. The temperature continued to drop, and her breath came in increasingly desperate gasps as the very air seemed to thicken around her. The ghostly children began to move closer, their forms becoming more solid and defined with each passing moment. The girl with the ribbons reached out with one translucent hand, and where her fingers touched Sarah's arm, the skin began to burn with cold that felt like fire. "The house chose you," she said with terrible certainty. "Just like it chose us. Just like it chose all the others who came before." Sarah forced herself to move, stumbling backward out of the nursery and into the hallway. But as she fled, she could hear the children following, their footsteps echoing with the hollow sound of wooden shoes on bare floorboards. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, speaking in languages both ancient and unknown, weaving spells of binding and entrapment that seemed to wrap around her like invisible chains. The mansion itself seemed to come alive as Sarah ran through its corridors. Doors slammed shut behind her, trapping her in an ever-shrinking maze of rooms and hallways. The wallpaper began to bleed, crimson stains spreading across the faded patterns like spilled wine. Pictures fell from their frames, shattering on the floor with sounds like screaming voices. In her panic, Sarah found herself in the mansion's basement, a place she had not intended to explore. The stone walls wept with moisture, and the air was thick with the smell of decay and something far worse. Ancient symbols were carved into every surface, their meanings lost to time but their malevolent purpose unmistakable. This was where the true horror of the Blackwood Mansion had its source. At the center of the basement sat an altar made of black stone, its surface stained with what could only be blood. Around it lay the bones of countless victims, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Sarah realized with dawning horror that the Blackwood family had not been the mansion's first victims, nor would they be its last. The house had been feeding for far longer than anyone had imagined, drawing the unwary into its embrace and consuming them slowly, savoring their terror and despair. The ghostly children appeared around the altar, no longer playful, but revealed in their true nature, as servants of whatever ancient evil dwelt within the mansion's walls. Their eyes blazed with unholy fire, and their mouths opened to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth that no human child should possess. "Now you understand," the girl with ribbons said, her voice echoing with the power of the grave. "We were like you once, investigators seeking truth, but the house showed us a different kind of truth, one written in blood and sealed with souls. We tried to escape, tried to warn others, but the house made us part of itself, and now it will do the same to you." Sarah's equipment began to malfunction, screens flickering with images of past victims, their final moments of terror captured in digital amber. Her voice recorders played back conversations she had never heard, desperate pleas for help from people who had vanished decades before her birth. The EMF detectors screamed warnings that came far too late. The temperature in the basement plummeted below freezing, and Sarah's breath came in sharp, painful gasps. Ice began to form on the walls and ceiling, creating twisted sculptures that looked disturbingly like reaching hands and screaming faces. The children moved closer, their forms now solid enough to cast shadows in her failing flashlight beam. As hypothermia began to set in, Sarah's thoughts became sluggish and confused. She tried to remember why she had come to this place, but the memories seemed to slip away like water through her fingers. The cold was merciful in its way, numbing both her body and her terror as the inevitable drew near. The last thing Sarah saw before the darkness claimed her was the altar beginning to glow with an inner light. pulsing in rhythm with a heartbeat that seemed to come from the very foundations of the house. The ghostly children gathered around her fallen form, their expressions now almost pitiful as they welcomed their newest sister into their eternal vigil. When the morning sun finally penetrated the mansion's boarded windows, it revealed only an empty basement and Sarah's abandoned equipment, still recording the whispers that would never cease. Her car remained parked outside the mansion gates, keys still in the ignition, as if she had simply stepped away for a moment and intended to return. The town council received her final transmission 3 days later, broadcast from equipment that had supposedly been destroyed. Sarah's voice, changed and hollow, spoke words that chilled the blood of everyone who heard them. "The investigation is complete," she said with unnatural calm. "The mansion is not haunted. It is alive, and it is very, very hungry. Do not send anyone else. Do not try to help us. We are home now, and we will wait here forever, welcoming new friends who come to visit our beautiful house. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore sealed the mansion's gates with chains and posted warning signs, but she knew it would do little good. The house had fed again, and its hunger would only grow stronger. In the years that followed, hikers and thrill-seekers would occasionally report seeing lights in the mansion's windows and hearing children's laughter echoing across the moors. Sometimes, on particularly dark nights, residents of Elm Street claimed they could see a figure moving past the mansion's windows, a woman with short dark hair and modern clothing, who seemed to be setting up equipment as if preparing for some kind of investigation. But anyone who looked too closely or showed too much interest would find themselves drawn to the mansion's gates, where the whispers waited to welcome them home. The Blackwood Mansion stands to this day, its Gothic spires reaching toward a sky that never seems quite clear above its roof. The children still play in their eternal nursery, their games growing more elaborate with each new addition to their ghostly family. And somewhere in the basement, an ancient evil continues to pulse with malevolent life, patient and hungry, waiting for the next investigator who believes they can uncover its secrets without becoming part of them forever.